Hey, it's Elwin Robinson, and I'm back with Morley Robbins, the creator or discoverer of the root cause protocol and the author of the Cure Your Fatigue book, which you can see in the background there, which is available everywhere that sells books. And today I'm very excited to do this follow-up episode with Morley, talking going actually through my blood test results and looking at them and creating a protocol, I guess, that's more personalized to me based on these results. And I love these episodes. I was just saying to Molly before we started filming, I love going through people's results. I do it quite often when I go on other people's podcasts, going through their genetic results with them. I just think this. Some people learn very well by focusing on kind of general theories, but I'm the kind of person who learns better by looking at specific examples. And so if you're that kind of person, I think you're going to, like me, then you're really going to love this episode. So I really appreciate you coming on again, Molly, and I also really appreciate you suggesting that we do this and offering to do it for the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. And I do this all the time, so it's a lot of fun to have the rubber hit the road. That's really what it's about. So I look forward to our discussion.
Absolutely. So I want to say to people, we spent a good over 2.5 hours, I think, in the previous episode, like explaining the theory in depth. And you could say, if you really want to understand the theory, get the book that you can see there behind Morley, Cure Your Fatigue, for, a proper, introduction and breakdown to it. But I suggest we should probably do the 5-minute, if possible, explanation of exactly where you're coming from. Again, strongly recommend people at the very least watch part one to get a better idea, and then ideally read the book. Is it possible, Morley, to do a brief summary before we go into the results of what we're talking about here?
Yeah.
Awesome.
As long as it doesn't cut into my book sales, right? No. As I was pointing out earlier, the prevailing thought in the public and especially in the practitioner community is that there's 1,000 reasons why we get sick. Some toxin, it's some pathogen, it's sunspot activity. There's always another explanation. And what we've done within the root cause protocol is recognize that there's a 3-ring circus that regulates life on the planet. And it's iron and oxygen and copper. And those 3 elements play this very primal, powerful role to dictate the movement of electrons and the creation of what we call oxidative stress. And what makes copper unique is it's the only element on planet Earth that can regulate both iron and oxygen at the same time and not create any oxidative stress. And so the whole premise of the protocol, you talk about cure your fatigue, really fatigue is, the technical term is cellular energy deficiency. But there's a whole other way of thinking about it, is fatigue is just an expression of aging. And so what we're trying to do is slow down the aging process, and we're putting the brake on excess iron, putting the brake on the accumulation of oxidative stress, and trying to optimize the expression of copper in our body through our diet and through supplementation. That's pretty much the gist of it.
Fantastic. Okay. And so when I was speaking to you in the first episode, I guess did my usual thing of saying, well, what about this case? What about this exception? What about this exception? And that probably led you to saying, well, let's just actually, have a look at a specific example. So, and I know you have, you've trained, is it like 1,000 practitioners who all, do this protocol with people. So could you explain, before we look at my results or anything, explain a little bit about, so as you said, one root cause, dysregulation between iron, copper and oxygen. Okay. I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but a lot of your advice is, quite widely applicable, but there are, specific situations, right, where people may have to approach things in a different order or, prioritize different things or whatever. So, again, I know it's going to be very hard to summarize. I believe you have a whole in-depth course where you teach this, but as concisely as you're happy to. Like if you go and see a root cause practitioner like yourself or any of the people that you've trained, how do those people work? What are they looking for? What are they trying to understand? What's their, what's where are they coming from?
Yeah, no, great question. Um, in a minute, we're going to look at your actual blood test results, and that's what a lot of practitioners do is they fixate on some test. If it's not a blood test, it might be a hair test, might be some um, organic acid test, whatever the domain is. Um, and while we recognize the importance of these tests, what we're really interested in knowing is what's the story of stress in your world. And what's important for people to realize is that when you have oxidative stress in your environment, you have when you have stress in your environment, just general stress in your environment, it becomes oxidative stress inside the body. As soon as the body perceives that there's stress, you've just changed the ability of the iron and the oxygen and the copper to work together. And there's very sophisticated um, immune markers and very sophisticated metabolic pathways that respond to stress that are triggered by cortisol, triggered by adrenaline, triggered by inflammatory cytokines, and what have you. And what we're really trying to do is help people to understand that the origin of all of their dysfunction starts with their perception of stress in their environment. That's how we're different than the average practitioner. Average practitioner is trying to read the results of a blood test like it's tea leaves. Oh, and they're going to give you a horoscope of what's causing your. We know what the problem is. The problem is this dysregulation of the copper, iron, and oxygen. What we're trying to do is get people to realize that it's a very natural byproduct of their perception of their situation, and there's an elegance in our body's design to realize that when faced with stress, what the body ultimately needs to do is overcome the fatigue. That's what stress is all about. The body's inability to make energy. And so what the immune system, what the metabolic pathways are all about is trying to reignite energy production to respond to that stress. And that's, I think, how we are different is that we're not ignoring the blood markers, but we're really trying to step back and say, what's driving this response in this person's body and get them to connect the dots to their state of being, their level of agitation about their situation, and how it affects their metabolism inside their body. So it's absolutely amazing. And it's not, it's very well studied. I don't think it's well taught. That's the key, is trying to connect those dots. And there's all sorts of body-mind dynamics, but very few that get down to this granular level of energy production. And really that's what drives our whole philosophy.
Okay. Well, do you want to treat me like a client or a patient then and ask me about that? Is that the first thing you normally do, as you said, before you even look at test results?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just think in general, um, most people are dealing with stress. We know that. So, to the extent that you feel comfortable just sharing, what are some of the big um, headlines for you as it relates to your day-to-day life? I'd just be curious to know what are you facing on an ongoing basis with your trying to work your way through the labyrinth called life.
I'm happy to be transparent. Yeah. In some ways, I'm in a very privileged position now, I think, where I have less stress than a lot of people. I definitely had a lot of stress in my past. I may be wrong, but these days, like emotional stress, I don't really have a huge amount of triggers or, like difficulties in that regard. It's more, it feels like there's physical, like I still have toxins that my body is dealing with. But yeah, I'd say, but I'd say because I had such a background of having a large amount of stress of all kinds, and, trauma and childhood and all that kind of thing, I guess I've created a life for myself where peace and harmony are quite high on the list of priorities. Because, often people say they want peace, but actually they don't because they find it boring. um, so
It's very
I'm
true.
like,
Yeah.
if I have to have peace and boring or stress and excitement, and that includes, I used to have a lot of quite, I'd say, toxic or pathological people in my life. I think being around people who are narcissistic and sociopathic, for instance, my understanding is that has a very strong impact on the sympathetic nervous system. That's probably even worse for you than most diets or most whatever. So yeah, I moved recently to a country where I feel safer and happier. I have people around me. So probably the biggest stress maybe honestly, and I know it's not a big deal compared to what a lot of people go through and compared to what I've been through in the past, but it's just things not happening as quickly as I want them to. That's probably like the number one self-created stress that I have.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a defective patience gene. I have drives me crazy. It doesn't seem to respond well. So I relate to that. I think an important part of this, and I appreciate you sharing what you brought up. Um, you slipped in childhood trauma. We've all had that, and I think what's important is that um, the reason why it's called trauma is because it keeps playing out in our body, keeps playing out in our psyche. And one of the things we put a lot of emphasis on is emotional release techniques like EFT or emotion code and body code or integrated processing technique, where where the client is taught how to let go of that experience. Like in my case, I'll give you an example. When I was 6 years old, my dad was struggling with manic depression and schizophrenia. Okay, that's a heavy load. And they had done electric shock therapy on him, and it hadn't really done a lot. And so the psychiatrist was going to do a second electric shock therapy. And for your listeners, if you've ever seen the movie Cuckoo's Nest, you know what's involved in that process. It's a pretty rugged experience. And my dad said, that's not going to happen again. And he literally ran away from home, never to come back. So, what do you think a 6-year-old would think about that event? Well, we're very self centered when we're 6 years old. Some of us are self centered when we're 60 years old, but at the age of 6, you're very self absorbed. And I took the position that I must have caused my dad to leave, which has played out in my life in many, many ways. And I only carried that wound for 56 years. And then when I was 62, I did emotional freedom technique. And suddenly my life went from black and white to Kodachrome because I learned in that experience I didn't cause my dad to leave. That it was, just life that happened. But I was able to release that perception that I had done that. And it was a very liberating experience. And so we really encourage people who do the root cause protocol to identify and work with those issues to release them, because that trauma, whatever it was, creates metabolic instability inside the body. And there's a wonderful article about it. Excuse me. The lead author's name is Zamin Pira, Zaminpira, 2019, and it talks about how fear can create cancer, fear from some historical event. And so it's just getting people to realize the power of these emotions and these perceptions. And even in your decision to relocate, I feel safer where I am now. It makes perfect sense. But there was something back wherever you were coming from that was creating a sensation of threat. And that was, I can assure you, that was playing out in your metabolic pathways. And so it's just getting people to realize that. And the phrase that I use when I'm working with folks is people with high IQ are drawn to the RCP. So you already passed the IQ test, right? But people with high IQ have two genetic defects. We struggle with letting go. We're control freaks. And we love complexity. It's we're very proud of the fact that we can work our way through very complex thought. But what the whole basis of the protocol is get you to realize that you need a practitioner to help you let go of your trauma. It's very powerful, very cathartic. And the whole premise of the protocol, it's a very simple solution. So we're trying to get people to realize that there is value and elegance to that simplicity, but we're dealing with people who prefer to have it complex. So the phrase we use is, well, do the RCP standing on your head. That's more complicated, but it'll still work. And it's just getting people to realize that the body does have these very sophisticated mechanisms of recovery once you've dealt with that three-ring circus, the copper, iron, and oxygen, if that makes sense.
Hmm. And so are you saying like your practitioners will be doing that therapy,
No,
trauma work? No, but you're saying you help people to realize that they need to seek that elsewhere.
exactly.
Okay.
A very small subset of our practitioners actually do that work. The vast majority of them refer it out to other practitioners to do that, which I think is far more preferential because it begins to blur the lines between the role of the RCP coach being just that, a coach, as opposed to the intervention, if you will. The whole framework that we're operating from is we're trying to get people to realize that you're the guru and we're just the guide. We're trying to use these proven principles, but get you to adopt them, incorporate them, and then you become the real change agent in your body's recovery. We're not sprinkling pixie dust. It's just your body taking over with the natural process of recovery.
Okay. And yeah, I'll talk to my own. I did therapy for a while. I did EMDR. I've done a lot of bodywork therapy. I don't know if you're familiar with Alexander Lowen. And yeah, so I read all his books and did his practices for quite a while, as well as the Reichian kind of system. Lowen's books are great, like in terms of seeing that correlation between early trauma and the impact it has on the body, right? He gives so many examples, case studies over and over again. Like you can literally see it in the body, which is very interesting. Um, but and I think therapy's really helped me work stuff through. But eventually, I was like, you know what? I don't think we're really doing much. And she's like, yeah, I think I agree. And then I was like, but the thing that's always maybe slightly suspicious of therapy is that the therapist is only reliant on what they're being told by the client. So I was like, why don't we start having therapy with my wife, and then she can point out all the things that I haven't been telling you. So then we started doing group therapy for a while, a year or something, and that was great, and that helped me get on better with my wife, although it wasn't bad in the first place, but it definitely helped. And then eventually I was, so I'm not saying I don't have anything to resolve. I'm sure I do,
Yeah,
but
that's fine.
I don't. I feel like these days it's not the main thing, and it's more the physical thing that, like the what's the word? The consequence of that. Like what's the residue, the backlog from all the physical imbalance caused by all that stuff. That.
And another thing that's taking place that we talked about in the first session is as we get older, we accumulate more iron. And what's really important for your listeners to really understand is that uh, aging is not complicated. It's just iron accumulation. And what I was sharing with you earlier is that at a cellular level, there's a very predictable aging process when iron isn't being properly managed due to a lack of bioavailable copper. And that's the hinge point for understanding why this mechanism is so important. And I think it's just getting people to recognize this very central mechanism in our being that can be stimulated and managed through diet and through this type of intervention of emotional release techniques. The key is, well, we're not talking about talk therapy. We're talking about these interventions where you are taught how to release the connection you have to that whatever that trauma was, and it's very powerful.
I
And
think talking, I was really against talk therapy, but I think talking is helpful as well. But, that's in Reiki and alone therapy, they teach you have to do both. You have to do it on a body level, but then it's also good to talk about it because there's that thing about like conceptualizing things. And, there's studies that show just writing down, for instance, like something that happened to you, like helps you to process it and have less of a negative attachment to it. But yeah, I agree. And I think EMDR, as effective as it is and as well known it is, it's actually just a small part of what is taught in things like Lowen and Reiki therapy, because it's the whole body that stores the trauma, not only that one part.
exactly, absolutely true. Yeah. I mean, many years ago, before I did this work, I mean, I was back in my 20s. I went to a therapist who was able to touch different parts of my body, and the explosion of response was amazing. I was like, wow, where did that come from? So, yeah, there are many different modalities. And as you say, this trauma does get stored. Well, that becomes trigger points, or it becomes some metabolic breakdown. And we just don't think about that. And that's what we're trying to do, is get people to connect the dots, literally, that this, whatever these emotional events or experiences that we've had, they will affect our energy production, and that over time will begin to accumulate into symptoms, which over time will become more and more significant.
If you've ever thought to yourself, why am I always hungry? Why am I always thinking about food? And then beating yourself up about it, stop. It's not lack of discipline. I know this is controversial to say, but the truth is it actually isn't your fault. You're not greedy or gluttonous. You're not undisciplined. You're actually leptin resistant, and you're not alone. Leptin resistance is a consequence of living a modern lifestyle of excess blue light, excess stress, not enough sleep, and chemical food additives. It's the number one reason so many people in their 40s and 50s feel hungry 24/7 and can't shift the weight no matter what they try. Hi, I'm Elwin Robinson from the Rejuvenate podcast, and along with Dr. Miriam Mikitsky, I built the Hormetics weight optimization system because we kept seeing the same thing. Good people doing everything right, but still stuck because their hormones were actually the problem. And conversely, when we helped them with their hormones, losing weight, not overeating became really easy for them without even trying. The leptin balance formula is the first formula we released. It contains African mango, chromium picolinate, Ceylon cinnamon, and alpha-lipoic acid. Chosen because the science shows that these ingredients at these precise quantities help restore the full satiated signal naturally. Go to advancedhealthgenetics.com/leptin, order now, and you will be invited to join our clinical study the moment you check out at no extra cost. So you can track exactly how well it works for you. And you can help us to prove to the world exactly how well it works. And to thank you for being a podcast listener, use code REJUVENATE at checkout for 20% off now. That's advancedhealthgenetics.com/leptin and use Rejuvenate for 20% off now. Okay, well, let's look at my results then. I'm sure that will open up a lot of other conversation about more general principles. So let me see if I can share this document that you sent. So I, before the call, I sent to Morley a list of all the test results that he and his practitioners commonly check. I sent my results. I'm not sure if you use them all, Morley, but I think you use the vast majority anyway. And he has collated them together in a spreadsheet, which I'll now share. And you can look at our screen, or you can look at your own if you have it somewhere else. There's a couple of things I sent you, like I think lead and
The other one was
potassium.
potassium.
Yeah.
I've never-
But they're not things that you have an ideal ratio for. So this is just all the stuff, the classic stuff that you and your practitioners test, I'm guessing. So, yeah. All right. I won't take over. Take it away.
We have about a dozen markers that we look at, but we're also looking at ratios of certain markers, which is very, very important. And this is not meant to be an exhaustive list of markers, but we found it to be a very revealing set. Um, and so where we start is with magnesium in the red blood cell. It's a very important indication of how a quarter of the cells in our body are red blood cells. And when they are low in magnesium, they're going to have more stress. Or if you have more stress in your body, it's going to show up as low magnesium in the red blood cell. And so ideally, we want to see that marker at 6.5. Very rarely do we ever see that. It's more your level at 5.1, I think it was 5.17, is that's a very typical standard marker. It's the people that get into the fours, and then I've got some clients in the threes where I really begin to get nervous about their body's capacity to respond to the stress they're under. And so the 5.1 is fairly typical. Yeah, you have a question?
Well, yeah, I guess a comment and a question. The comment first, like, this is what I love about this. I'm sure you're familiar with Brian Johnson, right? The Do Not Die guy who's kind of become a celebrity. So he shares his test results frequently, and I have to laugh because he shares his results and then he shares like what they mean, and he's like top 1% or top 0.1%, something like that. And I remember one of them, like his core body temperature was 94.9, and he was like top 0.1%. That's awesome. And I'm like, that's terrible. That's like, and so it's so interesting to, like, and that, that's one of the challenges of all this, right? Getting test results that are accurate is one challenge, but I think a much more difficult challenge is actually interpreting them and understanding them. And this is why I'm fascinated to learn about your way of interpreting these results. And the magnesium specifically. So every other test result that we've got on this sheet is within the last 30 days. This one's old. The last time I did this was with a Nutraval with Genova Diagnostics, and this was like July 2025, so almost 6 months ago. But the thing I wanted to say is 5.1, what you've converted into 5.1 there, that was the top of their reference range. And now I know a reference range is only what they consider, what they averagely see, right? It's nothing to do with optimum. But it's still interesting. Like, if you're looking at a Nutraval, you'd be tempted to say that person's got enough magnesium now. They should probably stop taking it, right? Because it's so high on their reference range. So, and it's funny to see you then say, actually, it's okay, but it's nowhere near as high as we'd ideally want it, which is,
Well,
fascinating.
and I'm basing it on there was a monograph that I came across probably a decade or more ago, and it was written by the USDA, Department of Agriculture here in the States, and it was from 1962. And the monograph was all about magnesium in the red blood cell. And their reference range was that it should be between 6 and 7. In 1962, they're talking about, and now they've, again, like grade inflation in college, they've morphed it down so that anything over 4 to, I think, like 5.5 is considered the upper limit. No, that's not high enough. That's the problem, is that we've been led to believe that these lower numbers are more acceptable because the population has changed. That's really what's happened. The average person in 1962 is very different than the average person in 2026. So it's just there's been a change in our physiology and our morphology.
And they talk about that a lot with testosterone, right? Like the average man's testosterone was so much higher in the 60s than now. And I talk about it all the time in relation to thyroid and, the basal metabolism, how, our average metabolism has got a lot slower in the last 100 years. But I'd not come across that. And I think the crucial thing that people have to bear in mind, especially if they're watching this, listening to this, and they've been told something different, we're even going to have a lot of practitioners watching this who are like, oh, I got trained something different, right, in my school. We have to remember that a reference range is only a reflection of the average of the people who take the test. That's it. It's nothing to do with optimal. We always have to bear that in mind.
Yeah, exactly right. And actually, the 6.5 really comes by way of Charles Poliquin, who was an international trainer. and he wouldn't work with clients until they had a MAG RBC of 6.5 or more, because he knew what kind of stress they were going to be under in his regimen. So it's just, and again, he's a physiologist, exercise physiologist, not a doctor, but that was his standard. So I said, okay, if it's good enough for him, we'll use it as our reference point. Your yeah, go ahead.
Love it. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
Carry on. Yeah, I love it.
Okay. So then your hemoglobin is spot on. It's right where I would expect to see a healthy male, in the 15s, 15.5. That's very common. You'd expect to see in a woman probably around 13.5 would be considered a healthy hemoglobin. I think they are tweaking the hemoglobin ranges now post-COVID. I think they're expecting higher and higher levels, and it's I'm not sure what the rationale is, but we're seeing it worldwide. There seems to be a change, but your levels are very healthy and very good. Then we're looking at serum ferritin, and Elwin, I would argue that this marker is probably the most misunderstood marker on the planet.
Yeah, so please explain it to us. I'm fascinated by this.
Well, I think I've renamed it. I call it errortin because there's so many mistakes made by the misinterpretation of the results. The bookends of ferritin are the problem. It's the really high, the really low. Those are the two extremes. Very high is easy to explain. It's an inflammatory process in the liver that's driving it, and there's a breakdown in what's called ferritinophagy, the turnover of ferritin to release iron for the daily iron cycle. The low ferritin is where there's a lot of controversy now, and what practitioners are being trained to believe is that low ferritin is a sign of iron deficiency. That's not true at all. One of the world's authorities on iron is a iron biologist named Douglas Kell. He's at the University of Liverpool in England. And when I spoke to him a number of years ago on a similar video conference call, I asked him, I said, Dr. Kell, what's the ideal ferritin for a human being? You have to say, he had the wall of books like you have, and he's got more degrees than a thermometer. And he held up his hand and said, 0, which was a shock. And so now when people are below 20, practitioners go crazy. The best I can explain it is that low ferritin, or high ferritin is showing liver stress. Low ferritin, I believe, is showing spleen stress.
Okay.
And so 95% of the mechanism of ferritin is relating back to hepcidin. And that's an iron hormone that a lot of people don't know much about. But there's a very critical relationship between hepcidin and ferritin. And when hepcidin is rising in the body because of iron dysregulation, ferritin will drop. They're riding on a seesaw. Who did I learn that from? Douglas Kell. And so it's just, we've got to step out of the paradigm of conventional thinking and go to experts like Dr. Kell, he's a highly revered iron biologist. And it's just important for people to realize that I put the most stock in the hemoglobin, and which is about, that number represents about 80% of the iron in the body. 70% is hemoglobin, another 10% is myoglobin, which is very similar in its properties. But the ferritin, I don't really put a lot of stock in it, but the other one that I focus on is serum iron. And so the serum iron is what's showing up in the plasma. So we've got in the blood, when you spin it down, you have packed red blood cells, and then you have plasma on top. And that plasma is kind of a milky looking substance. Well, that's supposed to have the mineral composition of seawater. And it's the iron in the plasma. It's the ceruloplasm in the plasma. It's the various other metals in the plasma that are so important. And that's really what we're measuring in this test, is how's the seawater that's carrying all the red blood cells. And so your serum iron is a little bit elevated. I like to see it closer to 100. And these numbers for iron and copper and zinc being around 100 go back to the 1930s when people like Hans Krebs and Otto Warburg and Schultz and some very famous scientists and physicians were studying it. That was considered de rigueur, if you will, back in the day. And so, again, back to grade inflation. Oh, it's okay to have a. No, it's not okay. It begins to. What we're looking for in this test is subtle signs of stress in the body because there's stress in your world, if that makes sense. And so there's nothing alarming about a 128. It's just a subtle indication, oh, something seems to be out of balance. And it begins to allow us to weave the narrative as we go forward. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I love it. It's so interesting again because again, that I think that was low end of the reference range, that 128. So I think to get to your 100, it would be almost at the bottom of the reference range. So I can just imagine if someone actually had those two ideal values, right? 20 ferritin, 100 iron, and they went to not just a normal mainstream medical doctor, but even a functional medicine practitioner, a nutritionist, almost anyone, and they'd say, you need more iron, right? You're iron deficient.
And, and that is a worldwide bias now. Everybody needs more iron and be afraid of copper.
And so, interestingly enough, you mentioned about the spleen. Not really, necessarily understanding your perspective, but I kind of all iron supplements seem to have such terrible effects on people. I kind of just went away from recommending any to anyone, and so the only thing that I ever recommended was, interestingly enough, a spleen extract. and so
Okay.
and so I wonder if maybe that would be helpful for someone with very low ferritin, just on the level of, the idea that you take a glandular to support a gland kind of level, if not necessarily for the iron content, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, when push comes to shove, again, 95% of our daily iron requirement to make the red blood cells, that's why we need iron, but the bulk of it, the vast majority of it, is to create the hemoglobin.
Hemoglobin, yeah.
Yeah,
That's the other thing I was going to add. Dr. Miriam, who's my friend, who's on here on the show fairly often, she always says that she doesn't really pay attention to much if the hemoglobin is fine, like in terms of all the iron and the MCH, MCV, all of that kind of stuff. If the hemoglobin's fine, then it's fine. Like you don't have to worry about it. So it's interesting to hear you say the same thing.
yeah, no, I'm very much in her camp. And so it's just getting people to realize that the iron it's a very important part of our physiology, and we can't live without it. But it can very easily get out of regulation, and then begin to create a lot of disruption, as we'll see if we get to that article that I sent you.
Yeah.
So
So I'm fascinated to hear how to, lower these, but we won't do that yet. We'll go through everything first, then you'll tell me what you recommend.
that's right. So then TIBC is total iron binding capacity. It's basically looking at what are the number of docking stations in the plasma for iron. And healthy TIBC, it's really a derivative of transferrin. Transferrin is the iron transport protein, and some scientists and clinicians regard transferrin and ceruloplasmin as the two most important proteins in the plasma for controlling disease. Very interesting, very different way of thinking about it, because they're mindful of the recycling system. But typical TIBC would be around 350, 360 maybe. Yours is a little bit elevated.
Typical or optimal? Because presumably they're not the
Optimal,
same.
optimal, yeah, optimal. And so when that begins to rise, that what I'm really focusing on is there's a fudge factor that I can use to get from TIBC to transferrin, and you take TIBC divided by 12.5, and you're going to get within the ballpark of transferrin. You actually had the marker, as I recall, and it was
Yes.
32.8. And so the ideal transferrin, and again, there's a little bit of Morley math in here. Typically, transferrin is reported as a 3-digit number, So it'd be 328, but I like to compare it to ceruloplasmin, which is always measured in 2 digits. So I move the decimal point over in transferrin so we can see. It's easier to compare 32.8 to 30 than 328. You have to do the math and all that. But the 32.8 just suggests that again, a slight rise above optimal, but nothing to be concerned about. And again, what's particularly helpful is to then have at your disposal the ceruloplasmin, which is just a couple columns down, and your ceruloplasmin is at 25, and ideally it should be 30. And so what I'm looking for is the symmetry between transferrin and ceruloplasmin. And the ideal of ceruloplasmin comes by way of research here in the States back in 1960. Two world-renowned hematologists, Scheinberg and Sternlieb from Harvard, did studies, and what they were looking at is what is the optimal level and the optimal activity of ceruloplasmin. And so you're close, but you're not ideal. You're not at that optimal level. And what we're looking
And
for
sorry,
is, yeah, go ahead.
can I just comment on the level there? So I said that's last 30 days. I think that's 2 weeks ago I got that done roughly. Less than a month before that, and in fact, every time I tested up until when I first tested it, which was around a year ago, it was always about 17, not 25. But that was the whole time I realized I was doing protocol with high doses of ascorbic acid and molybdenum. So all I did is I stopped taking ascorbic acid. I stopped taking molybdenum. I actually didn't follow any of your other advice yet. I'm still taking B vitamins, still doing a bunch of other stuff, still taking zinc. But I just stopped those two, and it shot up from 17 to 25 within a few weeks. So I thought you'd find that interesting, maybe not surprising.
No, I think that validates the research. I mean, the
Yeah,
new and
because
the
I
new
think
and
they're the
48.
first two things that you say, right? To yeah, in your list. So I was like, I'm not doing the whole list yet. I'll just do the first two, and it already increased it by like
Oh, I think that's
50%.
good. I think that's phenomenal. And to see the challenge we've got, Elwin, is that to the average person, ceruloplasmin is just a new word. They don't understand it as kind of this focal point of physiology within the body, and that's just that's comes by way of a lot of research and just acceptance that the body has this perfect design. We just didn't know that. So your transferrin and ceruloplasmin, they're within striking distance, but there is an imbalance there, and your uric acid is spot on. That so for people to understand this, ideal uric acid would be 4.0, and this comes by way of Rick Johnson, who's a physician at the University of Colorado in Denver. I don't think anyone understands uric acid better than he does. And typically, you'll see that practitioners will strive for 5, but in a conference I attended a couple of years ago where he was speaking, he said, really what you want to get to is 4. 4 is really, you're going to optimize the body, because when you're making uric acid, you're not making ATP. That's the key.
Oh,
That
really? I've not heard that
as uric,
before. That's interesting.
as uric acid is rising, it means there's a suboptimal production of ATP. It's very, very useful since there's no good way to measure ATP inside the blood. So I think that's a really important marker. Then we get to your
Can I just
zinc.
ask a quick, sorry, just before you move on from uric acid. So I'm looking at my historical uric acid, 'cause, with this UK testing company. You can see it all going back all the way to 2019. Anyway, it's sometimes been really low, like even lower than that. Like I'm trying to think in your measurements, 3.5, something like that. So I guess the question I want to ask is, can it be too low from your perspective? And if so, because again, I've asked Dr. Miriam that. I've shown her my results. I'm like, that's really low. Is that a problem? She's like, not really. So I was wondering what your take on it is. Like, can it be too low? Is it ever really a problem?
When it starts to get low, like below 4, especially below 3, I've uncovered research that begins to correlate low uric acid to a neurodegeneration. And what they theorize is that the uric acid is leaving the blood and going to the cerebral spinal fluid, so it's not showing up in the blood. but it's being used as an antioxidant in the process of that domain of physiology. Again, there is no definitive characteristic of low uric acid, but it is being increasingly correlated with neurodegeneration. So
that was the other thing. So another guest that we've had on a few times called Jacob, his theory is that, uric acid is an antioxidant, and actually that it's important for excreting excess copper. And so he was recommending to boost your level of, not excessively, but if it gets too low, to boost your level of it with molybdenum. So I'm sure you disagree with that, but I guess I'm just saying that to say that you need his theory is you need a certain amount of uric acid as an antioxidant, I guess.
So uric acid is an antioxidant in the blood. It's a prooxidant in the cell. It's a very important, very odd dynamic. The question then would be, the question that's never asked is, why is copper rising in the blood? Why is it unbound from ceruloplasm? That's the question that no one's asking. And there are these agents like ascorbic acid and citric acid and antibiotics that destabilize ceruloplasm to release copper, and then practitioners are trained to attack the copper, but ignore the fact that, no, wait a minute, it's the ascorbic acid that's the problem. And that's where I think there's the breakdown in the logic trail in the world of conventional thought.
I didn't actually realize, so if any copper that's detected by a blood test is going to be unbound from ceruloplasmin?
Absolutely. 95% of the copper is designed to be bound by ceruloplasmin.
Yeah, I realized that. I thought it would still be picked up on a blood test. I guess I never looked into it. So, okay. So the only copper that's picked up on a blood test is not bound to ceruloplasmin. It's free.
That's my understanding. Now, I may have that wrong, but that's my understanding.
You're probably right. You're a lot more of an expert in this area than I am. Okay, great. Just so I'm clear. Okay.
And so then we get to the zinc copper dynamic, and there's a lot of confusion around this, courtesy of Carl Pfeiffer, who was a famous psychiatrist back in the 60s and 70s. But we're led to believe that they need to be in a ratio. No, I don't. Back in the 30s, the iron, zinc, and copper were all at 100. And so I'm not advocating a 1-to-1, but your zinc, at least as I calculated it, seems notably low. It's one of the lowest I've ever seen. And I'm not sure what that would be a function of. And maybe I don't know of any properties between molybdenum and zinc. That's a possibility. I don't know. But that is
I doubt it. It's an odd one. Again, I've run this one by Dr. Murray. My zinc has generally been high, going back to 2021 when I first tested it. In fact, it's been over the reference range before. And even in July, when I did the NutrIval test, it was high end of normal and reference range. It suddenly shot down, and interestingly enough, my lead, the toxic metal lead, has been very consistent. It was really high back in 2021. It was like 27, which is close to, serious. But for the last year, it's basically been very stable at 3.5, including only 6 weeks ago, I tested it and it was at 3.5. Suddenly, then my zinc drops, and so does my lead. So my lead's gone down from 3.5 to now 2.4. So it was completely stable for a year, and then suddenly it's gone down by about 30%. So my working theory is that for several potential issues like improvements in my lifestyle and sleep and all the rest of it, my body seems to be using up a lot of zinc to create metallothionein to clear away that lead. Just based on the fact that the lead is suddenly going down rapidly when it was stable for so long, and then the zinc is going down. And so I guess that was the question. That, as I said, I didn't follow that part of your protocol of not supplementing zinc, because that, as you say, extremely high level of zinc is while supplementing 150 milligrams a day of zinc glycinate. Like my body just seems to be absolutely burning through zinc. It may be something else more worrying, but as you say, my most of my other test results really don't show any major issues.
Well, I think what an important ground rule is when people are looking at a blood test, they've got to be thinking about what's the level in my tissue, because all this is
Yeah, of
blood.
course. Yeah.
We don't know what the tissue level is, and so when I see a low zinc in the blood, I'm thinking there must be high zinc in the tissue. Why is there high zinc in the tissue? And I don't know what the mechanism would be behind that, but it's just important for people to have that mental agility to don't get fixated on just this number. Be thinking about what's happening in the tissue. It's really really important because a lot of the confusion about uh, high copper levels. Oh, you're copper toxic. You're a copper desert at the tissue level. That's what it's really revealing. And the confusion about anemia. Oh, your iron is really low in the blood, but it's raging high in the tissue, but they don't measure that. And so people need to have this facility to see it in both domains, both the blood and try to extrapolate what's happening in the tissue as well. Because if you don't have copper in the tissue, you're going to have a world of hurt. And if you have a buildup of iron and no copper, then you've got a lot of problems on your hand that aren't typically recognized in the world of conventional blood testing.
Yeah, and so I guess, like, so do you see I could be an exception there? Because as you said, you generally don't recommend zinc supplementation because it builds metallothionein, which will deplete copper. But in my case, the copper is, well, you haven't got to it yet, but only slightly low, whereas the zinc is very, very low and the lead is too high still compared to what we want, especially in the tissues, as you just said. So would I be an exception then to the zinc rule?
I don't know. What I'm not, um, metallothionein is for heavy metals, right? Um, and so what I'd be interested in knowing is what's the lead in your environment? Is there some unique um, presentation of lead in your environment that you
No,
may
my
or may not
environment's
be able
changed. It's in the bones. It's got a half life of 20 years. 90% of it, an adult, according to the WHO, is in the bones. The body mistakes it for calcium and it just stores it in the bones and it's just sitting there for a very long time and it's slowly leaches into the blood.
to? I've not studied lead that much. I know that it has a very strong affinity for copper enzymes. It'll knock
Yep,
out
it messes with those 100%. Yep.
it'll mess up ALAS and messes up ferrochelatase. That's really where the crisis is in a lot of anemia is some kind of lead exposure. But so I don't know. The low zinc is a conundrum, but I think you've got this lead issue. You were focusing on molybdenum. Uh, there may have been other things you've done in the past. So I think it's important to take a holistic view about all of the metals, and there may be value. I try to approach zinc through the diet, not through supplements.
Well, I mean, me too. I have about 400 pounds of organic beef every day, which I think is some of the best, staple foods that are high in bioavailable zinc. So I try and have a decent amount from diet as well. Oysters are higher, but I don't know. I'm not a fan. But I think I get more zinc from food than 90% of people, based on going through a lot of people's, chronometer results with them. But so I don't think a lack of it in food is the key thing. And as I said, like even a couple of months ago, it was normal, so it's just suddenly shot down.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean I think it's a wild hair. I think it would really take some digging to get a little deeper on that. Copper
Fair enough.
is almost ideal. Yeah, copper is nice and strong. It's not ideal, but it's not elevated, which is can be very typical in a lot of people's blood testing. We talked about the
And so
ceruloplasm.
And sorry, if it is elevated, let's say mine was what 120 or something like that. What would that mean to you?
It would mean that there's some chemical agent in your environment that's destabilizing your ceruloplasm. See, what we don't know, Elwin, is we know that your ceruloplasmin your ceruloplasmin level is 25. We don't know what its activity level is. So level is equivalent to height. Activity is equivalent to IQ, and your height does not define your IQ. And so that's where the real breakdown is in clinical assessment, is not knowing the IQ of ceruloplasmin, which is the most important enzyme in the body as far as I'm concerned. Its ability to work with oxygen and iron is really, really important, and it's completely put in the curtains in conventional thought. They don't even know what we're talking about.
Yeah, and we covered that in quite a lot of detail in the previous episode. You explained what that means, the ceruloplasmin activity.
Exactly. And so again, back to Sternlieb and Scheinberg, the ideal ratio of copper to ceruloplasmin is 3.33. It's 100 divided by 30. And yours is 3.75, which is very good. But I tend to look at this marker as it's a logarithmic marker, so that an earthquake of 3 is different than an earthquake of 4. And so it isn't just a simple 4/10. There's a significant difference between 3.75, but still you're in a very enviable space. Most people don't have that kind of ratio. Then I also look at as we mentioned before, the transferrin to ceruloplasmin ratio, and you're very close to ideal, 1.3. It's very rare to see someone who has a 1 ratio for transferrin and ceruloplasmin. Then the fun marker is to look at ceruloplasmin compared to uric acid. And when I was meeting with Dick Johnson a number of years ago, I mentioned this ratio, and his eyes lit up because he never thought about putting those two together. He knew right away what it would imply. And so ceruloplasmin is really dictating optimal copper function, and uric acid it's not working. And we're not making ATP, we're making uric acid. And so the ideal would be 7.5. You're within striking distance at 6.1. The fact that your ceruloplasmin has come up as much as it has, I think, is awesome, and it'll be interesting to see where it is if you start to engage in the protocol for a few months, where your ceruloplasmin comes out at that point.
I just want to say something that validates what you've said so far, which is, because how I was wondering if you could ask me about symptoms or whatever, but how I feel over the last month or so has been significantly better. Funnily enough, actually, as these lab values have got a lot closer to your ideals. I mean, the zinc is a bit of an exception, as we said. But I felt better with the higher ceruloplasmin. I've actually felt better with the higher copper, honestly, as well. And I felt better with a lower ferritin, and I felt better with a lower iron. And all of those have shifted relatively recently. So just to, it's quite interesting.
Well, it's nice to have serendipity meet the conversation. That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah. If you'd have done this with me 2 months ago, I would have looked a lot less, close to your ideal. And I felt a lot worse as well. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. Well, again, the concept of fatigue has been narrowcast to chronic fatigue. No, it's a system-wide cellular expression of low energy production. That's really what fatigue is. It's a suboptimal energy production at a metabolic level. Then we come to your vitamin A and vitamin D, which is a fascinating comparison. Your vitamin A is notably high. Ideally, we'd like to see it around 63 to 65, and you're at 84. And so the way I've interpreted this through the years is that when it starts to rise in the blood, I'm beginning to question whether it's being stored in the liver. And so that the liver is a storage vehicle for copper and retinol. It's been turned into an iron depot by modern food practices. And so I just wonder whether there is any liver stress that might be taking place that you may or may not know about, that could be resolved, intervention. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Well, funny enough, I had the same thought for different reasons. As I think you might know, a significant minority of my regular viewership are people who believe vitamin A is a toxin. We talked about that a little bit last episode. We don't have to talk about that again. But they say one of the things that proves it's a toxin is that it builds up in the liver. And I looked into this, and it certainly does build up in the liver, right? In a lot of cases, that's why eating animal liver is such a good source of it, because it is built up there, as does copper, as you just said. Um, so and liver stress, yes. So basically all of October, I wasn't able to work because I had a root canal, and I think infected bone underneath removed after like 25 years. And so I was on these strong painkillers and strong antibiotics for like several weeks. And I tested my liver enzymes immediately afterwards because I wanted to see like the damage of what I'd just done to myself to try and get this toxic tooth out of me. You know the importance of that, because we talked about Weston Price last time, right? Like the rotten root canal is not great. But the liver enzymes were actually okay. They weren't significantly raised. But I think it might even explain the copper being higher than usual as well, actually. Like the copper and the vitamin A, it could well have been that liver stress that has released a bunch into the bloodstream. That's a very good working theory.
Did you trace what organ that tooth that had the infection tied to? Did
Yes, I
you
think
can
it was the small intestine.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, which
Okay.
I'd have had
Right.
issues with that I've talked about in my podcast before. So yeah, 100%.
Well, I think the misunderstanding with the retinol toxicity is I think natural retinol is very different than retinol palmitate, which is sold in supplements. And so they don't have the same physiological properties. And I think that if you don't have good sources of copper, then the body doesn't know how to process the retinol. And I think that's where a lot of the breakdown is I've had people who presented with what they thought was vitamin A toxicity, which turned out to be really iron toxicity because of the form of retinol that they were using. And the symptoms were very similar, but it was really an iron issue, not a retinol issue. So it's just another way of interpreting the outcome.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. I went 6 months with a zero vitamin A diet. I would say I didn't really feel any better or worse. The only form of vitamin A I have now is dairy, but I have quite a lot. I think dairy suits me and my genetic. I'm half Dutch. Every Dutch person seems to eat a ton of dairy. But it's still not that high, and it definitely doesn't explain it being so high by a long shot, given that I have no other source other than dairy. So I think your idea of the liver being stressed and releasing it into the bloodstream is probably much more likely.
Yeah. I mean, if you were really curious, you could do a MRI of your liver and see what the iron content is of your liver. A
Can you do that?
ferroscan. Oh yeah, Fer, Ferriscan. Ferroscan is the company out of Australia that has a network of MRIs around the world that can measure that. That might be an intriguing, not inexpensive, but it would be an intriguing study to see what kind of congestion are you dealing with in your liver. And again, the lower the copper, the higher the iron is going to be in the liver. That's an axiomatic relationship.
All
Your
right.
D, your
If I can
D,
get it in my new home country, I will. I'll do
yeah, okay,
it.
that'd be fascinating. Your D is actually a little above where I like to see it. I like to see it closer to 21. I know people love to see it in the 70s and 80s, and we don't ascribe to that at all. And so it's really the relationship is there should be 3 times as much retinol as vitamin D in the blood, and you're showing that ratio is very consistent with what we look for. But and again, the vitamin D would be probably the second most misunderstood nutrient on the planet after the blood test for ferritin. Just rampant confusion about what low vitamin D really stands for. I think it's a very poorly understood marker.
Yeah, fair enough. And I have to admit, maybe a little bit embarrassing because I've had other guests on telling me I shouldn't be supplementing vitamin D. I think I did take a bit of vitamin D supplement. I can't actually. I think it was. I think I was trying to boost my immune system after that tooth extraction. I was just doing everything but I normally don't take it, and actually my blood levels do normally sit right around 20. If I don't supplement, then they're 20.
Yeah, that's
and,
exactly
and
what
then
it should.
and then people tell me that's too low. You should be taking some vitamin D. And then occasionally I listen to them and then I'm like, no, I'll stop.
No, I think, see, the issue here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation, is what we're using the test as a way to have a conversation with the client and to find out some of the nuances of what you've gone through, to learn about the tooth extraction, to learn about the experience with molybdenum, ascorbic acid, things like that. That is worth its weight in gold. It isn't that the collective score for Elwin is a A minus. Like, we don't care about that. But what we care about is understanding what might be behind this fluctuations and what's the story behind the fluctuations. That's the real key, is to get the individual to take ownership of the fluctuation and that they can begin to regulate it through the protocol. That's really what the intention of the protocol is. Bring the body back into balance.
Okay, fantastic. So should we get to maybe well, okay, the first question, I guess, is there any variation in like what you recommend to people? Okay, great. So I guess you can either maybe start with what you'd recommend specifically for me that's different. Actually, why don't you give the usual recommendations first? That's kind of the general recommendations, and then we can go to how you might modify them depending on the person's situation. Would that be okay?
Yeah. I mean, there pretty much is one recommendation, and it is the root cause protocol. In the same way that you and I look different, right? So we think of ourselves as human snowflakes because every snowflake is different. But every snowflake melts in the presence of 33 degrees. And every human snowflake melts in the presence of too much iron, particularly at the tissue level, not necessarily at the blood level. And so, what the macro recommendation is going to be to follow the stops and the starts of the root cause protocol. That's really that's the macro recommendation. I think in your situation, though, you're like 6 standard deviations ahead of most people because you have this active engagement with practitioners. You're experimenting with your body. You recognize signs of stress. That's not in the typical patient population. So I think from my standpoint, one of the things that I would encourage you to do is go on an internet diet and stop researching for a while and just let your body take over. Because again, you are a high IQ guy. You are driven by new information. And what we're trying to capture here is what's the wisdom of the body. And so I would just encourage you to say, let's take a rest from what about this, what about that, what's the next shiny object? Well, this is the shiny object. Let's let the body get there. I think in particular, I'm pleased to hear that you've kind of let go of the focus on ascorbic acid because I think it's it's a misunderstood nutrient that causes a lot of disruption that people don't know about because very few people measure ceruloplasm in the body. It's a really important nutrient or marker, metabolic marker to be aware of. I think, in addition to what the protocol talks about, I think even with all of the therapy that you've done, I think you might still benefit from either EFT or integrative processing technique, just to go through this cathartic release of the traumas that you might have encountered from childhood up to the present day. And it's not meant to be exhaustive, but there are going to be flashpoints. When you look back on your life, you can probably identify 3 or 4, maybe half dozen events. And it's important to go through this very methodical process to release your magnetic attraction to that trauma. It has a very powerful effect on the immune system. And then I think in light of what we've got, I think the big question mark I would have right now is what to do about your zinc. I'd really want to dig into that a little bit more. Particularly, I'd want to understand the lead problem and the zinc problem and how are they related, because I don't know that much about their relationship. But I think in your physiology, there seems to be something that is allowing that lead to come out, which I don't measure it, so I'm not always aware of it. But on occasion, when it's presented, it's not that disruptive, but apparently it is somewhat disruptive in yours. And I would just love to know why. And then I'd want to also know
Wait,
about,
sorry. Lead is not that disruptive? Is that what you
well,
said?
no, it is disruptive. I know it's
Okay.
disruptive. It doesn't always present in people's blood results.
Oh,
That's
well,
what I'm
just
talking
because hardly anyone tests for it, right? I mean, like
about. That's
lead,
exactly right.
mercury,
Exactly.
cadmium, aluminum, they're all extremely disruptive if they're high. It's just, unfortunately, they're very rarely tested for.
Right. Well, and so the other thing that we have to be mindful of is there's a very important protein in the kidney called megalin. A lot of people never heard of it. What is its job? Its job is to optimize the ability of metallothionein to release the heavy metals through the process of the kidney filtration. And if megalin is not happy, that release doesn't take place. Well, what tweaks megalin function is iron. And so the kidney has tremendous sensitivity to iron in the body and in the bloodstream. And so if there's a heavy metal dynamic, people don't instinctively think about iron. They think, oh, I've got to do EDTA. I've got to do some heavy metal chelation. The body knows how to chelate these metals if it's not exposed to too much iron. And so that I think is, as we've had this conversation, that's what I would be really thinking about is there some dynamic in your kidneys that might be leading to this increased expression of the lead? I don't know. I'm just trying to understand what might be behind the increased expression.
Maybe. It's important to know that most heavy metals are not high at all. And one of my companies is genetic reporting, and I do have a genetic variant that means that my body's not very good at processing lead. So I think that is part of it. The other thing is, and this is very mainstream WHO stuff again, but if a person has low calcium in their diet, they absorb significantly more lead and also reabsorb more lead. And when I found all this out and I calculated it, because I'd avoided dairy for such a long time, I was on maybe 200 milligrams a day of calcium for over a decade. And the recommended daily amount is maybe 1,000 milligrams. So I think a very low calcium diet for a very long time was another contributing factor. But the megalin, I think one of the ways you could potentially test if that's what's going on would be to see how much is being excreted through the kidneys, right? To test urinary levels of lead and see if it's getting out or if it's not working correctly. And actually, that's a test result I'm waiting to hear back from. So I'll find out how that's going. But I suppose even if it's working well now, it may not have been up until very recently so that's something I guess I may never know. Could we go back to you said, okay, the recommendation is the root cause protocol, the stops and the starts. Could I go through those? First of all, just to list them so people learn them or get reminded of them. And then second of all, to give again, as if I were a client, like feedback on them, like which ones I'm happy with and which ones I have more questions about. Is that okay?
Okay, sure. That'd be great.
If you've been thinking to yourself recently, not even eating that much, why am I still gaining weight? This message is for you. Hi, I'm Elwin and Morely. Most people don't realize insulin resistance is quietly turning more and more of what you eat into stored fat, even when portions are small. That's why Dr. Miriam McKidsky and I created the Hormetics Weight Optimization System, and our most popular formula is the Insulin Balance Formula. It contains precisely chosen quantities of berberine, fenugreek, zinc, and folate, proven in studies to help your cells hear insulin again so your body burns those calories instead of storing them as fat. Go to advancedhealthgenetics.com/insulin, order now, and you'll be invited to join our clinical study the moment you check out at no extra cost, so you can track exactly how much better you feel. Use code REJUVENATE for 20% off now. go to advancedhealthgenetics.com/insulin and remember to use the code Rejuvenate for 20% off now. All right, so basically it's a list of things to stop and to start. You do give an order of, how you'd approach this, part one, part two, but let's just start with the stops and starts first. So stop iron supplements, iron fortified foods, and anything added iron. No problem. By the way, Rejuvenate podcast has no problem recommending that to people in general. We've had several guests on who all disagree about a lot, but the one thing they all have in common is what you actually said, that iron is a root cause or maybe the root cause of aging and disease. So as I said, the only type of iron I've ever recommended as a supplement is basically a spleen extract. So it's not really iron, it's just spleen. How do you feel about spleen extract, actually? I know you're a fan of liver extract.
No, I think it's a great concept, and it gets to the heart of the matter, I think. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And of course, it probably got things in like transferrin and all that kind of stuff, right? It's ceruloplasm, interestingly. Yeah. Okay. Stop number 2, vitamin D supplements. No problem. As I say, I occasionally take some, but I'm 95% with you on that. Happy to stop as part of this protocol. Happy to generally recommend it. Oh, I guess here's a question for you. Is there any level of, like we said with the, I don't know, like the zinc, you're not sure necessarily if there's a level where you might recommend supplementation. Is there any level of vitamin D on a lab test where you would consider supplementation, or even if it's, I don't know, 2 instead of whatever mine was, 30? Is there ever a cause for it?
Lowest vitamin D I've ever seen was 14, and it was an iron issue in the liver that was causing that. And so we need to understand that vitamin D levels is not it's not like measuring gas in your gas tank. It's not a dipstick test. It's a miles per gallon test. There's algebra involved in a low vitamin D. There's enzymes involved in low vitamin D. We need to find out what the enzyme breakdown is. What's the catalytic breakdown? And so we're going to promote cod liver oil, which has a balance of A and D. But we, as a rule, do not encourage people. And we're pretty strong about saying, do not take vitamin D supplements. It's not indicated. No.
Okay, fair enough. As I said, we have had other guests. I think I did a whole hour with someone about why we should never take vitamin D supplements. But maybe we can do that another time. Let me go to number 3. Stop number 3. Calcium supplements, as they block magnesium and iron absorption. So this is an interesting one to me, and this opens, I guess, a kettle of fish. Again, calcium supplements, I'm very reluctant to recommend them to people. It's quite hard to get enough calcium from your diet if you completely restrict dairy, would be my take on it. What do you think?
Well, again, we have to ask, why are you restricting dairy? And usually it's because people don't have a functioning lactose. They're not able to process lactose sugars because they don't have a functional lactase enzyme. Well, what's the mechanism of lactase enzyme? Got to have copper. I did. So I was born with a lactase issue, and it's completely resolved. It's just, again, people don't. We're not born broken. We're born undernourished, and so most people who take calcium have either osteopenia or osteoporosis, not knowing that that's an iron problem, not a calcium problem. It's iron triggering acid phosphatase to erode the calcium in the bone matrix. You will never restore calcium by taking calcium. You've got to get to the iron problem first. That's the mechanism.
Okay. And so in terms of calcium, you're a fan of dairy then, obviously. Think everyone should be eating it. Okay. So what about, like people in Asia or whatever, and none of their ancestors ever had dairy, and so you don't think it's, you think if you, just as long as you optimize this, it will kick in and your body will start producing the necessary things to break it down? Is that your experience?
I come back to the wisdom of Weston A. Price. He studied 14 indigenous communities around the world. I don't know whether he came out and said everyone should be on dairy. I don't know that that's a solution. But every culture has some source of calcium in their diet. I would assume, because it's what drives the bulk of our skeletal muscles and our skeletal frame and a lot of enzymatic activity. But I'm not going to push dairy on everyone. But I think what we've got to do is don't think that a calcium supplement is going to make up for some food-based source of calcium that might be in a different region of the world. I just think we've got to think holistically about the food sources, not from a bottle. I don't think a bottle is going to be the solution.
And what about high levels of calcium in water, like mineral water? Because it's basically calcium carbonate, isn't it? It's exactly the same as you'd find in a supplement. What's your view of that? Is that any better?
No, I mean, again, you've got to be very careful. Like a Perrier, which is very popular, is 43 parts calcium to 1 part magnesium. Well, basically, Perrier is a heart attack in a bottle. So what you want is waters that are maybe 2 to 1, 3 to 1, maybe as much as 5 to 1. You start to get above that 5 to 1 ratio, and you're going to have too much calcium for the magnesium that you've got in your waters that you're drinking. Again, it's all about ratios. The ratios are really, really important.
Okay. Zinc supplements, we've discussed that already in detail, but you generally don't recommend them. So in my case, we'll look at it. Number 5, stop molybdenum supplements because they disrupt copper metabolism since they are mined, ground, and chemically treated. Yeah, you've really, talked about the connection with ceruloplasm and how it breaks the bond between copper and ceruloplasm. Happy to not have molybdenum. Anything you want to add to that one?
No, again, what people need to understand is our focal point is to optimize the ceruloplasmin expression in the body. And everything in a stop or a start is vectoring back to that objective.
Okay, so something that obviously disrupts it, like molybdenum ascorbic acid, that's pretty obviously not a good idea from your point of view, which makes sense. Stop one of their multivitamins. You know what? I believe that so much. I can't remember, like a year ago, stopped selling one on my store. So I'm just against it as a principle. Even when I had it on the store, I said, look, this is a starting point, but it's much better to find out what you actually need. But eventually I just removed it. So happy with that one. Number 7, stop synthetic B vitamins. Yeah, I think I discussed this already. I'm a bit reluctant with that one. I kind of have good, and I don't understand the thinking behind it as well as I do most of your other recommendations, to be honest. So B
A
vitamins are
lot
important
of
for copper metabolism, but source them from food instead of a bottle. Why? Like, why is it okay to have some things as a supplement like magnesium, but not B vitamins?
a lot of the B vitamins that are sold are coming from coal tar derivatives, and that's not a really healthy source for B vitamins. And all we're trying to do is get people to realize that what's coming out of the bottle may not be in your best interest, and wherever possible, try to get it from food the way Mother Nature intended it. And we're not, in no way are we uh, downplaying the importance of B vitamins. We know how important they are. My personal theory is that the B vitamins all require copper to do their work, and they're all designed to regulate iron. Now, I don't have exhaustive science behind that, but my intuition says that's the most obvious reason why we have those. When you look at the structure of the different B vitamins, they are amazing chemicals. Each one is very, very unique and different. And invariably, there's a relationship back to iron with every one of them. And my personal belief is that the mechanism to control iron is through copper, and the B vitamins just happens to be one of the vehicles to do so.
Okay. What about if someone like vitamin B12 deficiency? It's very serious, especially if it's progressed beyond a certain point, right? It's hard to even you know recover from it, unlike most vitamin deficiencies where you just take it and you recover. So what about in a case like that? And it's hard to get enough. It's hard to get a anti-deficiency dose of vitamin B12 from any food. And a lot of people also have problems with, absorption. They have intrinsic factor issues or whatever. I understand that in an ideal world, they would be able to get enough from food and they would be able to digest and absorb it properly. But what about for people for whom that's just not the situation they're in?
Well, they gave a Nobel Prize in 1934 for using liver to cure B12 deficiency. And so I think we've gone
Okay.
astray about what the sources are. And again, I don't ascribe to the fact that B12 is activated by cobalt. Makes no sense to me at all. The symptoms of a B12 deficiency and the symptoms of copper deficiency are virtually the same. So I think we have been trained to believe that, oh, it's a cobalt factor. I don't believe that. I don't believe that for a second. And so I I don't always have deep science behind a recommendation like that. I just intuitively, it makes no sense that cobalt is suddenly this important factor in the same way that B5, you go back into the research, it was activated with copper. That's well established. But in 1942, Merck changed it to a calcium activated mechanism. Well, why did they do that? Why did they do that? And now every B5 that's sold in a synthetic form has calcium D pentothenate with a little R and a circle after it, courtesy of Merck Laboratories. That's the kind of jury rigging of the system that I bristle against. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. So, and again, what's building in the aging body? Iron. Oh, could there be this buildup of iron affecting the ability to absorb the vitamin D? Probably. And again, I don't know all the receptors involved or the metabolic pathways, but again, at the macro level, an aging body has a higher level of iron that's going to affect the capacity to absorb these critical nutrients. So it's just a different way of looking at it.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, the liver answer is fair. A yeast extract, would that be another thing you recommend? People want more B vitamins, food
Yeah,
from a food source.
yeah,
Okay. I was
absolutely.
going to ask you
Yeah.
this with calcium, but I forgot. So it says calcium supplements as they block magnesium and iron absorption. Now you've used the term iron chelation a couple of times. Why do we want to, especially in the US where there's lots of foods that are fortified with iron? It's harder to avoid extra iron, right? Even if you're not taking it proactively. Um, is there any? I don't think I've seen in your list like any kind of iron chelation agents that you, or just things that lower the absorption of iron from the diet that people are already eating.
We regularly recommend eye detox, IP6,
IP6.
quercetin.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Sorry, what's the
So
first one? Eye detox.
it's called eye detox. One of my students developed a product, Little Eye Detox, and it's a very balanced approach to chelating iron out of the blood and out of the body.
What does it contain?
It's got IP6, it's got quercetin, it's got a number of it's a balance of factors to deal with that.
Okay. So sorry, you do recommend them. What about EGCG? Have you looked into that as a iron chelation agent?
Yeah, no, it's a recognized iron chelator. I don't know that it's a real powerful one, but it certainly has standing. It shows up in the research regularly.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I misspoke there. Obviously, you do recommend them. That's my bad. Um, okay. All right. Stop number 8. Stop all synthetic forms of vitamin C. We've talked about that already a lot. Stop number 9. Stop high fructose corn syrup. Again, something I'm happy to do. I haven't had them in God knows how long. And then also and artificial sweeteners, since they make ceruloplasmin lose its copper. That's interesting. Is that all artificial sweeteners? Is it aspartame, sucralose, even stevia?
As far as I know. And again, people don't realize how powerful high fructose corn syrup is to disrupt our physiology. It's a beast. And if you want to increase your uric acid and get heart disease, focus on high fructose corn syrup as your staple in your diet. It's a very powerful metabolite.
I found honestly fructose just doesn't agree with me at all. I mean, like it's okay, but I just find fruits less agreeable than starches. I don't know. It may just be because my liver's under stress from iron or something, or lead or whatever, like you said. But do you generally think that fructose in general is a suboptimal form of fuel, or not? Is it only the artificial type?
people get really nervous when I start to talk about fruit. Again, our ancestors did not eat fruit every day. It was unheard of. It was seasonal. You might have canned it and maybe had it occasionally, but this idea that we should have 5 different forms of fruit every day, that's a postmodern recommendation that I don't think makes sense given the historical origin of our ancestors. We just didn't have that luxury. And
Interesting. Yeah,
I was just going to say they'd love to talk about the antioxidants in the fruit. Well, the antioxidant enzymes are 1,000 times more powerful. Ferroxidase, peroxidase, um, glutathione peroxidase. I mean, people don't know about those enzymes that really are designed to clear the problem, and they're all copper dependent. And so people don't recognize that in their day to day thinking.
interesting. All right, so you're not a huge fruit fan. I think a person should be able to eat fruit and it'd be okay,
Oh,
but
sure.
the idea that it should be a staple food, it's never felt right to me.
Right.
There may be a genetic element to that as well, though. What about if someone is, ancestry is from the equator, where fruit is more, available all year round?
Again, they're going to be geographic variations. Again, that's the beauty of the Weston A. Price research. Is
Yep.
I think people need to really ground their perception of diet through his research back in the 1920s and 30s. Again, and I think I might have mentioned it in the first conversation, but I'll repeat it. Humans are the only species that ask each other what to eat. Every other animal knows what to eat. We stumble mightily and think, oh, I can, even though this diet is from Asia, I can eat it here in North America. Or even though this is from Alaska, I can eat it down in South Africa. No, that's not how the food distribution was designed. Otherwise, we'd have the same food all over the world. We don't. There's specificity to the foods that are found in different regions for a reason. At least that's how I would see it.
Great. Yeah, I love it. I 100% agree. And for those who are a bit confused, maybe because they have many ancestries, that's one of the things my company, Advanced Health Genetics, does. It does give some recommendations on what's, better for your specific type of genetics. Okay, stop using industrialized omega-6 oils. I think anyone watching this knows that that's a good idea. Stop using products with fluoride. I hope anyone watching this knows that's a good idea. Um, but the reason you give is not the usual because it changes the bioavailability of magnesium. I hadn't heard that. The main thing I was aware of is it, disrupts the brain and the thyroid gland. Um, so that's interesting that it also messes with your body's ability to utilize magnesium.
Magnesium fluoride is what's measured in safety testing. The magnesium fluoride level in the bone, as you're exposed to fluoride, rises, and it's tying up more and more magnesium as that takes place.
Fascinating. Okay, yeah, another good reason. Don't use colloidal silver as an antibiotic because it kills copper. That's interesting. Happy to do that. Stop eating low fat, high carb, processed, refined foods since good fats are needed for proper copper absorption. Interesting. Yeah. So again, as you said, there could be some variation in that depending on someone's ancestry and environment and all the rest of it. But I agree with this, and this is obviously kind of the Western price perspective, as you said. I think of all the 14 tribes you visited, not one of them on a low fat diet, right? Um, all the, yeah. So I agree. Um, Low fat, high carb processed. Interesting. You said you were quite influenced by Ray Peat initially. You said he actually reading an article of his is what got you to look into ceruloplasm and understanding it better, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
So yeah, his perspective obviously is kind of different from that you should eat a high carb diet because it helps to boost the metabolism. And I think that's objectively true. I don't recommend it and I don't do it, but it is true those people who eat like a low fat, low protein, high carb diet, it does speed up the metabolism. So, what would be your argument to those people as to why that's ultimately not a good idea?
Uh, there's two, as I've come to theorize it, there's two axes in the body. There's a fat copper axis, and there's a sugar iron axis. There's going to be
Ooh.
more plentiful sugars in a high carb diet. And so, again, I think we are inundated with sources of iron, and we are restricted in our exposure to copper. And I just think that as you understand the ancient historical origin of life on the planet, copper's at the center of it. And that's not taught, that's not understood. And I think we need to go back to original factory settings and be able to capture that elegance in our food system and in our physiology.
Okay, awesome. And lastly, limit exposure to environmental toxins, including unchecked blue light exposure and EMFs. So, good advice. So yeah, I'd say 95% of that I'm already on board with. Might take me a while to give up on the synthetic B vitamins. I think that's probably the only thing. Uh, um, and then there's the starts. And so the starts are in phases. So the foundation starts. So start taking adrenal cocktails, which I looked into this. Seems to be a combination of salt, potassium tartrate, and some kind of natural vitamin C source in water. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
Could you tell us why potassium tartrate as opposed to, say, potassium bicarbonate or potassium chloride?
It's actually any one of the three. People react differently to the chloride versus the tartrate. Again, it's whatever your body feels best under. We originally focused on the cream of tartar just because it was so prevalent, and then we began to realize that not everyone responded well to that.
Okay, so any of those three. And so this, you call it an adrenal cocktail because those nutrients, sodium, potassium, and vitamin C, are all supportive of the adrenal glands, correct?
Yeah, the adrenal glands need their minerals. The adrenal glands also need their whole food vitamin C. They need their fat. So Tom Cowan, noted physician here in the U.S., also very much tied in with the Weston A. Price movement. He calls adrenal fatigue fat deficiency syndrome. And so, one of the things that I've pieced together over the years is that any condition that begins with the letter A, like adrenal fatigue, anemia, appendicitis, things like that, all are signs of low vitamin A in your diet. It's kind of curious,
Autism?
but yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Just Google autism oxidative stress. You'll be shocked at what comes back.
Oh yeah, well, okay. Oh yeah, okay. So that brings me. You reminded me of another question I was going to ask. So do you? Okay, yes. Sorry, the liver. So you said, all right, B vitamins, liver is a great source. What about someone like myself who already has high levels of retinol? Would you still recommend such a high dietary source of retinol in that case?
I would want to find out how you would respond to castor oil packs to alleviate the congestion that's possible in your liver, and that would then alleviate some of the imbalance that's showing up in the blood versus what should be stored in the liver.
And how would you assess if there is congestion in the liver? That you gave me that Ferriscan, so that sounds great. Is there anything else that's a little more easily available? Do you pay any attention to, I don't know, liver enzymes or glutathione levels or anything like that?
Liver enzymes would be a classical, but they don't always express the congestion as you experience with your own situation. Um, I think it's just there may be stones. The prevalence of gallstones would suggest there's liver congestion as well. Um, and so, I mean, the ultimate test is going to be a needle biopsy, but I don't recommend that. It's very painful procedure. But that would be the gold standard is a needle biopsy to find out what really is the composition of the liver tissue in your body.
Okay. But going back to the question, if someone has high levels of retinol in their blood already, is it really a good idea for them to add to it?
Um, it's a fair question. I don't know that I have a good answer, Elwin. I don't think I've ever seen. I think maybe on one or two other occasions I've seen retinol that high, very unusual to see it elevated like that. It's usually, it might get into the 60s and low 70s. So I don't know what would be contributing to that very unusually high retinol.
But I'm
Again, I
saying
think the body,
without knowing why it's high, it's still the question is it a good idea to have more when it is?
well, I guess I would recommend the beef liver as a balanced source of nutrition and not just focus on retinol per se. I would be wanting to introduce a known food source that has balance in it as opposed to just triggering one nutrient versus another.
Yeah, I understand you're not recommending like pure retinol supplements, but I'm saying in the beef liver, it still would have a lot of retinol, which would likely, although not definitely, but likely drive the blood retinol level even higher, right?
Well, what I would suspect is that there's more iron congestion in your liver than is showing up in the blood work. And so the whole premise of the protocol is to introduce this balanced source of nutrition to allow the body to bring itself back into balance to free up the ability to absorb that retinol. I, we don't diagnose anything and we don't treat anything. We take stock of the numbers, obviously, but what we're trying to do is bring in this balanced source of nutrition to allow the body to find its own equilibrium. So it's a different approach.
Okay. Okay, and part phase one is a whole food vitamin C complex. So presumably that's like kind of a freeze dried camu berry or something like that. Is that the idea?
Mhm, mhm.
Okay. And taking magnesium. I think I've seen you recommend magnesium malate in the daytime and magnesium glycinate at night. Is that, do I
Yeah,
remember
it
that right?
isn't an absolute, but that's a very typical pattern. Yeah.
And that makes sense because malate is a ATP fuel. So, yep. And then glycinate. The only artificial sweetener I use, by the way, is glycine. I
Okay. That's right.
just use a
Yeah.
little bit of that as a sugar substitute occasionally. Um, so I'm a fan of glycine. So happy with all of those. Yeah, this would be one where I would hesitate. The last one here, start taking bioavailable copper. When it's written that way, I'm assuming you mean a supplement, not a food source, right?
Well, again, historically, we would have gotten it in the food. That's what our ancestors used to do. Post um, glyphosate, it's very hard to find copper in food now, and so the copper supplement is an alternative. But what I did was inspire something that's food based, but has copper bisglycinate as one of the key mechanisms to restore the copper status.
Okay. And so, would you even recommend that in someone like myself who has close to what you consider ideal levels? I know it's slightly lower.
I mean, I think that the
You
fact
would.
that you had, I would, I think the fact that you've had such a good response just with the changes you've made, it would be interesting to see what additional impact you'd have by introducing that nutrient in a bioavailable form would have.
And
The
in terms
thing, the
of
thing
it,
that we're missing, the biggest glaring defect in all of this testing, and I've mentioned it before, but just to reinforce it, knowing how tall you are is not an indication of how smart you are. And the problem we've got with ceruloplasm testing is we're only allowed to know the height of the protein. That has no relevance to its impact in our physiology. And so the purpose of the the purpose of the copper supplement is to optimize the loading of copper into that protein so that a fully loaded protein lasts for 5.5 days. An unloaded protein lasts for 5 hours. There's a big difference between those two. And so we're trying to optimize the body's natural mechanism of regulating iron, regulating oxygen, and avoiding oxidative stress. That's really what it's all about.
Mhm. You've mentioned a few times about how copper levels are low these days in food. Often when I go through people's chronometer, like looking at everything they're eating and evaluating their nutritional intake as a result of their diet, I see the copper's pretty high. It gets pretty high with seafood, certainly shellfish. There's often a lot of copper. It's pretty high with goat dairy. It's
Are
pretty
you
high
are you
with,
analyzing their food, or are you analyzing a nutrient table?
like I said, I'm using just a nutrient table. The chronometer is a tool that evaluates.
But the nutrient tables haven't been updated since the 1950s.
I don't know if that's true for all foods.
Well, it's true for most foods. And the thing is, Rutgers did a study in 2000 to look at the difference between nutrient tables and what they found in organic soil. It was very, very different. And so I think the, to depend on nutrient tables as a source of nutrition is very risky in a post-glyphosate world where minerals are coming out of the soil at a very prodigious rate. And so I think a really innovative concept would be to do a post-glyphosate meta-analysis of food worldwide. That's a massive undertaking, obviously, but we are blind not knowing that information.
Okay, it's a fair
And
point.
look, there's a famous book from 2022, Wilson and um, uh, uh, Wilson and Don Huber at Purdue University, did a study in South Africa. And they looked at what the impact of glyphosate was on mineral chelation in the soil in South Africa. And they just focused on South Africa. It's a worldwide phenomenon. People need to wake up to what's happening with farming chemistry and the availability of nutrients in the soil, in the food, and in our body.
Hmm. Well, the first things I mentioned were animal foods, right? Not agricultural. What do you think that the animal? I mean, okay.
Copper deficiency has been the number one nutrient deficiency on the farm, copper deficiency, for 80 years.
So that brings me to my question. So, what is the optimal intake of copper? Because right, they used to say 2 milligrams a day. Now they even say 1 milligram a day. What's your take on it?
In the 1930s, when they did studies of food here in the States, it was 4 to 6 milligrams of copper in the standard diet. By the 1960s, it had dropped to 2 to 5 milligrams. Now the RDA is 9/10 of 1 milligram. And in 2011, which we talked about, Dr. Clave found that 80% of people don't even get that 9/10 of 1 milligram. It's Occam's razor. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best. Let's focus on the copper. It's this Achilles heel in our physiology. It was meant to be in the soil, in the food, and in our body, and it's been methodically washed out. And suddenly we have this worldwide phenomenon of chronic disease. It's not, I don't think it's rocket science, to be honest. When you think about the fact that everything starts with oxidative stress, that's the technical term for fatigue. It's rising oxidative stress. The oxygen that can't be metabolized into water becomes an oxidant. Why does it become an oxidant? Because there's too much iron and not enough copper to manage it. That's the whole concept of the root cause protocol.
Do you make a distinction between organic and inorganic copper? Like some people, like in Ayurveda, they recommend using copper vessels to drink water out of and stuff like that. Do you think that's a good idea?
That's in a culture that doesn't have universal water sanitation. And
Sure.
so that vessel is a very powerful mechanism to kill pathogens. Does it provide physiological levels of copper? No. You're going to get trace amounts. But I think in the modern era, in a post-glyphosate, post-COVID, COV, copper's vanished, ID, iron's dysregulated. In that era, we need to go on the offense and bring in this critical nutrient that goes back to the beginning of time when suddenly photosynthesis started taking place a long time ago, and copper was at the center of that dynamic. And so we need to recognize this underlying mechanism of our physiology that has been lost in the education in the world of contemporary medicine.
If I could go back in time right now and hand the 30-year-old me one tool that would help save me 15 years of pain, fatigue, confusion, then this is what I'd do. I would give myself advanced health genetics all access reports. Now, unfortunately, it didn't exist back then, but if I could, or if I could go back in time and give myself the results that I've generated now, that's exactly what I would do. It would have told me instantly that I have multiple genetic SNPs, making me prone to choline, calcium, and tyrosine deficiency, among other things, lead and aldehyde toxicity, and bad histamine metabolism, which explain my brain fog, the IBS, the chronic sinus infections, the fatigue, everything. Instead of trying 400 random things, I could have laser focused on the top 5 things that actually mattered for my DNA. And that's exactly what this can do for you now. Over 500 reports, 200 million variants or SNPs analyzed with 99.7% accuracy, free lifetime updates, and the strongest privacy in the world. We're fully GDPR compliant. We anonymize your data. We store genetics and personal info separately, and you can delete everything with one click. We don't sell your data, ever. Try it now. Go to advancedhealthgenetics.com, and if you have an old DNA file, because maybe you've used an ancestry service like ancestry.com, 23andMe, anything like that, you can upload it and you have your first reports within hours. And if you don't, just select the DNA kit option. We'll send you a saliva test kit. It's really easy to do. Advanced Health Genetics is already by far the most affordable DNA reporting company of its kind. But if you use the code Rejuvenate at checkout, you get an additional 20% off your order. That's advancedhealthgenetics.com and use code Rejuvenate at checkout. Do it for the version of you that's tired of guessing. You deserve to know the truth about yourself. Okay, so let's finish with phase 2, eating organic ancestral whole foods. Very good general advice and makes even more sense in context of what you just said, right? They're more likely to be nutrient dense, including with copper. Drinking mineralized filtered water. People always ask me about that. I'll ask you. What do you recommend to people for water? How do you recommend they filter their water?
It's a challenge because there's a lot of stuff in the water, as you know. I mean, people use the Berkey filter. There's a company here in Florida and here in the States, pH prescription, very good system. There's a individual that I got to know. He does a lot of work with the Amish here in North America and has a very sophisticated system. The challenge you've got is that there's so many chemicals being put into modern sanitation systems. And then you've got the added challenge of in a non-urban area, you're dealing with well water. And there's typically a very high concentration of iron and manganese in well water. I think at the very least, what people need to do is test their water and see what the mineral composition is of that water, and find water filtration systems wherever they happen to be, to the extent that they're available worldwide. But I think the most important thing is to make sure that the water is mineralized, because that's what the body is seeking when it's thirsty. It isn't necessarily seeking H2O, it's looking for the minerals that are supposed to be in there. And I would really caution people from using a lot of bottled water because it's been distilled. There are no minerals there. And so we just have to recognize the limitations of water in the modern era. Again, feels like there's a snake under every rock, but we have to be careful about the water that we're drinking.
100%. I agree. It's a minefield. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Some good practical recommendations there. Next one is taking Mother Nature's source for B vitamins. We've really discussed that quite a lot. And we got start taking whole food vitamin E complex. We haven't discussed that one. Is that a supplement?
Yeah, it's best found in a supplement now, again, because it's been refined out. As soon as you take grain and you refine it, you're losing the wheat germ or the germ of the grain. Vitamin E is a chain-breaking antioxidant. It's one of the most powerful antioxidants that we can be exposed to, and it will keep iron-induced oxidative stress at bay. when it's taken at supplemental doses. So it's a no-brainer to increase the intake of again the full complex, not just alpha tocopherol, but all of the tocopherols and the tocotrienols. It's very important to have that balance.
Got it. Yeah, all the tocopherols and tocotrienols. I started taking start taking boron. I've actually started doing this recently, boron glycinate. Tell people why they should consider adding that in.
Boron is probably the one of the secret components of the protocol. Um, it's it really it's very, I don't know that it's catalytic. I think what its real strength is to mop up oxidative stress so it doesn't interact with iron. Uh, a lot of its properties for curing arthritis are really relating to its mitigation of oxidative stress. And so it's just a very effective tool that seems to have, it doesn't take high doses, but it seems to have a very significant impact inside the body to prevent a rise in oxidative stress because of the prevalence of the iron. It doesn't change the properties of iron. It changes the availability of oxygen to interact with the iron.
Hmm. Okay, fantastic. Not the reason it's that I usually see it recommended, but that's a great, probably a more important reason to take it. That's great. And then start taking cod liver oil. Lastly, in phase 2, this is a classic Western price recommendation. Is there anything you want to add about that?
No, it's been used for centuries, and I would probably give the nod to our ancestors having better physiology than we do, but but they had access to really um, wholesome cod liver oil back in the day, and so I think it's a nutrient that has been exploited. I think you have to be very careful of the companies that you work with. There are only 3 companies that we recommend, and I think it's very important that people know that there is value, excuse me, value in that food source, but you have to be very careful about which one you're using.
Okay. Yeah, because it's a highly unsaturated fat that goes rancid easily, presumably, right?
Right.
Okay.
And
All right,
what you want
awesome.
to avoid, what you want to avoid are the ones where they are forcing a relationship between A and D. You don't want it to be a perfect 10-to-1 ratio. It's very rare that you would find that. And so you have to be very careful about when you look at the label. Is it a perfect 10-to-1 ratio? Then maybe they are adding nutrients to the composition of that oil.
Okay. And then I'll skip the advanced nutrients just for time, but I would love to finish with the lifestyle upgrades if that's okay. And as you've said, introduced when appropriate, um, maybe talk about how that apply in my case with my test results and what you know about my background and stuff. Would that be all right? Place to finish?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I appreciate your time. Um, okay, so first one, start donating blood. Some people do this early as the iron release needs to be offloaded, sorry. Is this something that I should be doing as part of this protocol? Does it make sense for me?
To do the phlebotomies.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but yeah,
yeah, yeah. As a rule, we very regularly recommend up to quarterly blood donations for for men and postmenopausal women. For women who are still engaged in a menstrual cycle, we typically recommend a couple times a year, although there are many women who still do it 4 times a year. But there's tremendous benefit to lower that iron footprint. And when you do that, the body needs to replace that iron. And the mechanism is to use erythropoietin. Well, that hormone has 2 signals to it. One is telling the red blood cells we need to make more red blood cells, but it's also telling the tissue let go of the iron that you've got, and it begins to lower the concentration of iron that's accumulating in the body.
hmm. Okay, yeah, that sounds. And is there any blood level of anything that would um, mean that you wouldn't recommend it? Like if the hemoglobin is too low,
Oh no,
or
hemoglobin would be the pivot point. If your hemoglobin begins to drop below 12, you're not going to be able to donate blood. It's going to be next to impossible to do that.
They're not going to let you anyway.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Okay. All right. So basically, if they let you, you're in favor, pretty much.
That's right. Absolutely.
Okay. You've got 15. Start managing histamine levels and reactions. Please tell me more about that.
Histamines are the hormone of alert. Um, the irony is, many of the foods that are in this protocol can trigger a histamine response. It's just again the like liver can trigger a histamine response. Cod liver oil can trigger a histamine response, especially if you don't have optimal levels of bioavailable copper. The the body has a natural and conserved mechanism to neutralize histamines with an enzyme called histaminase, which is now called DAO, diamine oxidase. And when you don't have optimal levels of copper, you're going to be more reactive to histamines. So when people experience that phenomenon, we encourage them to go to practitioners who engage in NAET, which is an allergy elimination
Oh,
technique.
I did that. Yeah. Yeah. I know it. It's like acupuncture combined with EFT some way for
It's
allergies.
just an error message in the body. And so NAET will begin to lower the level of histamines while you're in transition to building up this bioavailable copper.
Okay. Actually, it was doing that that allowed me to eat dairy again fine. Honestly, it didn't work for anything else, but I think the reason is because I didn't really have a histamine reaction to anything else, so it wasn't really relevant. But it made all the difference with dairy. It was great, which is life-changing. I love dairy. Um, so I recommend NAET too. Okay, that's interesting. So histamine reactions, lack of copper. That's what you're saying, right? That's what
Well,
causes them.
at its core, absolutely. And there is a known relationship between iron and histamine. And there's also a known relationship between estrogen and histamine. And so, in a body that has low ceruloplasmin activity, there's going to be a higher level of estrogen because it's a backup antioxidant, and so you're going to begin to trigger greater interaction between the estrogen and the histamines.
So people who I'm familiar with would usually say that when there is higher copper, especially in relation to zinc, that increases the conversion of testosterone to estrogen, right? It upregulates the aromatase enzyme. But I guess you would say that's copper unbound to ceruloplasmin. So the problem is the lack of ceruloplasmin, not the excess of copper. Is that correct?
Exactly, that's exactly right. And I think it's a higher level of iron in a low copper body is going to trigger that aromatase enzyme as well.
Okay. All right.
It's not just the zinc. It's not just a zinc dynamic.
Another one you've got here starts releasing emotional stress. In many cases, major healing will not occur until this is dealt with. We already talked about that quite a lot near the beginning. Um, so number 17, start strengthening the bioenergetic field. What's the starting recommendations for doing that for people?
The bioenergetic field, just the whole concept of increasing bioavailable copper is going to increase energy production, is going to mitigate the fatigue. And so as the bioenergetic field rises, the ability to keep pathogens at bay rises with it. Again, we're back to Pasteur and Béchamp. The energetic field is what keeps us in balance. And in the same way that if you've ever worked with a boogie board, to be on one side or the other takes no energy, but to stay in balance takes a lot of energy in your legs and in your body as well to stay in balance. That's the bioenergetic field to stay in balance needs to rise as part of that process of homeostasis.
Nice. Love it. Number 18, start getting regular sunlight. This is, well known throughout the ages. Our ancestors thousands of years ago used to worship the sun as a deity, but it's been, I guess, reintroduced recently with the last 10 years or so in our field of people like Dr. Jack Kruse saying that the sun is all important. Um, what's your take on people who um, they burn easily? Like, is there anything that is that again excess iron? Is it a lack of copper? Is there anything you'd recommend to people to support them being more comfortable in the sun?
When I was little, I was born a redhead with a lot of freckles, very, very fair skin. If I thought about the sun, I got sunburned. And now, here I am in my 70s. It doesn't bother me at all. And so, what's missing in a body that has exposure to sun and becomes inflamed is lack of retinol, lack of bioavailable copper, and too much iron. It's absolutely axiomatic. And so I'm sure I was iron toxic as a child because of, when I look back on my mom was an alcoholic and my dad had all those mental health issues. They were a hot mess. And so that affected my physiology. But by the grace of God, I never really had quote unquote symptoms, and then had the good fortune to stumble upon this Mother Nature inspired solution. But I think the key is making sure that we um, recognize that sunlight is an essential form of energy, obviously, and that there is this conserved process by which we capture those photons. And what is retinol? Retinol is a light sensor. It loves light, knows what to do with it. What is vitamin D? It's a light filter. It blocks the light. Vitamin D, contrary to what people think, it actually blocks the light inside our body. That's where I think that's the core level of confusion about vitamin A versus vitamin D. But it really comes down to if you want to avoid inflammation, you've got to get optimal levels of retinol and copper, and you want to minimize the exposure to iron to prevent that kind of inflammatory response.
Very interesting. All right. And the last one is a nice one to finish on. Start doing joyful movement. I found that the more energy you have, the more you, as you say, strengthen your bioenergetic field, the more that is spontaneous and, natural. But what would you say to people who are, on the brink but need some encouragement, or where should they start?
You know, I was a couch potato and was very proud of being a couch potato. And then someone challenged me to run a marathon, and I thought there's no possible way I could do that. And the hardest the hardest part of that process was getting off the couch, but it was just getting to the end of the street to the stop sign. That was my first goal, was to get to the stop sign. And so much of the movement is mental, is thinking that you can do it. And I never would have believed that I could run a marathon. And I finished one, and I finished three, and I did an Olympic distance triathlon. So just to prove to myself that the body has this incredible power of resilience, but of control. And for those who are struggling to get off the couch, just, you got to put one foot in front of the other. That's really what it comes down to, is the pain of staying the way you are versus the pain of making a change. You've got to decide which level of that pain threshold are you on. And I think if people want to get into a better state of health, they're going to need to be more active, there's got to be more movement, because the piezoelectric effect is amazing in terms of how it begins to build on itself. So it's just getting people past that point of inertia to start moving is probably the biggest challenge.
It's interesting. I agree about the benefits of it. I slightly disagree though about, like, the way analogy I use is, like, if someone doesn't want to eat, you don't say to them, "Oh, you're too lazy to eat." You look at them and say, "What's wrong that you don't want to eat? It's natural to want to eat." And I actually think it's the same with movement. If someone doesn't want to move, I wouldn't want to, like, tell them they need to force themselves. I would look at, like, why do they not want to move? And it comes down to your system, right? Like, if you have enough energy, you want to move. Like, there's no need to force yourself. All
I think that's a good point.
like I love to move, right? Like, I hate going to conferences, not because I don't like learning, because I hate sitting down for hours at a time and not moving. Like, I just enjoy moving. Actually doing these episodes is probably the longest I ever sit down, because I spend a lot of time on calls with people, but I usually do it like with a headset on, walking around, my office. Like, I just enjoy moving. And I think it's a reflection, as you said, my not ideal, but not bad, energy levels in terms of the lab markers you looked at. And Yeah, I think I don't know about the value of forcing yourself necessarily. I think it's doing what you're talking about. It's resolving the root issue of lack of energy. And when you have energy, you'll want to move.
Thank you. That's a great way to describe it. We're not trying to shame people, and in no way are we doing that. But there is a natural desire to move when you have energy. And I think
100%.
it's just, yeah, it makes perfect sense, I think.
Yeah, and it's hard to stop yourself of anything. And if you're too whatever jittery, then that's a nervous energy. I understand that, but like it's not natural to just want to sit down all day. I don't think it's which is why like people who do it in meditation, monks and stuff. It's quite impressive because it's very difficult to just sit all day and meditate. It's, that's quite a feat of discipline to me. Whereas getting up and moving around and doing stuff throughout the day, that's just normal.
Exactly. I totally agree. Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is great. I've taken up too much of your time again, like last time, but I kind of took over there just because I wanted to share all your stops and starts, or all the main ones with people in this episode. But just to hand it back to you in terms of any final thoughts or final recommendations for me based on the test results, if there's anything, or just final thoughts to share with our viewers and listeners.
First of all, this has been probably the most thorough examination and discussion of the root cause protocol. So my hat's off to you for that. Between the first conversation and this conversation, it's a very powerful treatment of the program. I think the way I would conclude it is I genuinely believe there is a blueprint that runs our body, that runs our metabolism, that runs our immune system. And that blueprint runs on energy. And if you're stuck in fatigue, the blueprint doesn't work. And so I think the whole basis of this approach is to restore that three-ring circus, get the copper, the iron, and the oxygen back into some level of symmetry and balance, and allow the body to restore its own homeostasis. We have the natural mechanism and capacity, but we've got to have the right nutrients and the right sources of those nutrients. And it's just, once you are taking that path, then you just got to get out of the way and allow the body to resume that sense of balance. So I think it's really, it's a very straightforward, trying to get back to the original operating system and just allow the body to express itself as it was designed to. So just a different approach from what is considered in the world of convention, where there's a problem. No, I think that the source of the problem is the lack of energy. That's really where the problem starts, and that's what we're trying to restore.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And I'm very interested in your approach to restoring that energy creation process to a more optimal level. So thank you so much for taking the time to share that in great detail. I'm glad that it's the most detailed or thorough, whatever you said.
No, it's great.
Episodes
I'm going to refer people to this conversation. It's going to take about 4.5 hours of your day, but you're going to have a real working knowledge of what this is all about. And so I really appreciate the investment that you've made in it as well for your followers. I think it's great.
Well, thank you so much. And again, if people, they want to find out in more detail and more than you can cover in a podcast, definitely check out the book. And then you also, what's the website? Remind people, the rootcauseprotocol.com. Is there
rootcauseprotocol.com or rcp123.org. And then I regularly give out my email address, which is my first and last name at Gmail. And then people love to call me. So 847-922-8061. And I look forward to the conversation.
And that would be a +1 at the beginning for our international listeners or viewers. Well, thank you, Morley. It's been amazing. I hopefully we'll do a follow-up, maybe with me after I've done it for a while, or maybe with Chrissy, our co-host, if she expressed some interest already after going through she's also the producer, so she went through the first episode already and she was very intrigued, but she also had a lot of questions.
That's good. I appreciate that. See, I've never met a question I didn't enjoy, because that really allows for a common. It's like, even if we disagree, at some level, there's areas where we do agree. What's the point of differentiation? That's really what I strive to find. And it's like, I love questions. That's really where we can really have some spirited discussion to find out where that point of interface is.
Absolutely. Reflection of high IQ, enjoying questions, I would say, both giving and receiving.
That's exactly right. That's right.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, go and check out Morley's work. Go to the rootcauseprotocol.com and sign up to his email list, and you get something like 10-page document that basically gives you a brief overview. Everything you need to get started if you're more of a practical person, and if you really want to understand the theory properly, which I would also highly recommend, check out his book. And if you're a practitioner and you're interested in finding out, oh, how does this apply to my clients? You also have a training course where you teach this method to practitioners, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Coming up in February is the next class. So I encourage people to look into that.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Morley. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed that, I recommend watching our latest episode, which you can do by clicking above. And make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with anyone who you think might appreciate it. Thank you.